Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Story 1. I'm Mark, 34. I followed the trail into the Bridger Teton National Forest, and it followed me back home. The gravel road to Granite Creek had been rougher than I expected. My 30-foot Winnebago groaning through potholes that probably hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. But Sarah had insisted on this spot for our anniversary weekend. 10 years of marriage deserved something special, she'd said. Somewhere we could disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. The hot springs at the end of the trail would be worth it, according to her research. A natural pool carved into granite, fed by thermal waters that stayed warm even as September nights turned cold in the Tetons. I'd pulled into the primitive campground just as the sun touched the jagged peaks, casting everything in that golden light that makes Wyoming feel like the edge of the world. There were only 3 other sites, all empty except for an old airstream that looked like it hadn't moved in months. Sarah was already out of the RV before I'd even set the parking brake, stretching her arms above her head and breathing deep. "God, Mark, smell that air," she'd said, and I had to admit she was right. After 2 years of Los Angeles smog, the pine-scented wind felt like medicine. We'd set up camp quickly, Sarah stringing solar lights between the trees while I leveled the RV and connected the propane. Everything normal, everything perfect. She'd packed our favorite wine, a bottle of Pinot Noir we'd been saving for something special. We'd sat outside as darkness crept in, talking about everything and nothing, her hand warm in mine. That first night, I dreamed of walking, just walking through endless trees under a sky that seemed too close, stars that pulsed like a heartbeat. I'd woken feeling like I'd actually been somewhere, my feet cold outside the covers despite the RV's heater running. Sarah was still asleep, curled against my side, her breathing steady and peaceful. The second day had been perfect. We'd hiked the 4 miles to Granite Creek Hot Springs, soaking in the natural pools while eagles circled overhead. Sarah had laughed when I'd pointed out that we were the only people for miles, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. On the way back, she'd stopped to photograph everything: wildflowers, interesting rock formations, a deer that watched us from the tree line with intelligent eyes. That evening, she'd downloaded the photos to her laptop while I grilled steaks on our camp stove. The deer was in the background of several shots, always watching, always perfectly still. "It's like it was posing," Sarah had said, scrolling through the images. "Look, it's in the same spot in this one, and this one." I'd glanced over her shoulder. In every photo where the deer appeared, it was indeed in exactly the same position, standing at the edge of the trees, head turned toward the camera. What struck me as odd was that we'd been moving the entire time, walking along the trail, but somehow the deer had managed to stay in the exact same relative position in each frame. Probably just a coincidence, I'd said, but something about those photos made my skin crawl. The third night, I'd dreamed again. The same endless walking, but this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah was with me, except when I looked at her. Her face was wrong somehow. Too pale, eyes too bright, smile too wide. In the dream, I'd tried to tell her something was different about her, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. I'd woken to find Sarah's side of the bed empty, sheets still warm. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. I'd called her name softly, thinking maybe she'd gone to the bathroom, but got no response. When I looked out the window, I saw her standing about 50 feet from the RV, perfectly still, staring into the trees. I'd thrown on clothes and gone outside, the cold hitting me like a slap. "Sarah, what are you doing?" She'd turned to me, and for a moment, just a moment, her face had looked exactly like it did in the dream. Too pale, too bright, too wide. Then she'd blinked, and it was just Sarah again, looking confused. I don't know," she'd said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I just woke up and I was here. Was I sleepwalking?" Sarah had never sleepwalked in the 10 years I'd known her. But people change, I'd told myself. Stress, new environment, altitude, all sorts of things could trigger it. I'd taken her back inside, made her hot chocolate, and we'd gone back to bed. But I'd stayed awake long after her breathing had steadied, watching her face in the dim light from the clock, waiting for it to change again. The fourth day, she'd suggested we explore some of the unmarked trails she'd seen on the topographic map. "There's one that branches off about a mile up the main trail," she'd said over breakfast. "It's not on any of the official maps, but it's clearly marked on this old survey chart I found online." I'd felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Maybe we should stick to the established trails. Come on, Mark. Live a little. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, I'd thought. But Sarah had that look in her eyes. The same one she'd had when she'd convinced me to quit my corporate job and move to California, when she'd talked me into buying the RV, when she'd said yes to my marriage proposal. It was the look that said she'd already made up her mind, and I could either come along or be left behind. So, I'd come along. The unmarked trail had been easy to miss, just a gap between trees that might have been made by deer or might have been something else. But once we'd found it, the path was clear enough, winding deeper into the forest than any trail had a right to go. The trees grew thicker, older, their branches interlacing overhead until the sky became a distant memory. "This is incredible," Sarah had whispered, and her voice had seemed to echo strangely, bouncing off trees that were too far apart to create an echo. "It's like a cathedral." That's when I'd noticed the markers. They weren't official trailblazes. Those were standardized, painted rectangles that Forest Service crews maintained. These were carved directly into the bark, symbols that looked almost like letters, but not quite. They appeared every few hundred yards, always at eye level, always freshly cut despite the fact that some of the trees they marked had to be hundreds of years old. "Sarah, look at these," I'd said, pointing to one of the symbols. It looked vaguely like a stick figure, but elongated, distorted, as if someone had tried to carve a human form from memory and gotten it wrong. She'd traced the carving with her finger, and I'd noticed that her touch came away wet. The cut was fresh, sap still bleeding from the wound in the bark. "Someone's been here recently," I'd said. "Or maybe the sap just takes a long time to dry at this altitude," she'd replied, but her voice had sounded different. Flatter somehow, as if she was repeating words someone else had given her. We'd continued hiking for another hour, following the trail as it wound deeper into wilderness that felt increasingly wrong. The air grew colder despite the afternoon sun, and the sounds of the forest, birds, insects, wind through leaves, gradually faded until we were walking in near complete silence. That's when we'd found the camp. It was just off the trail, hidden behind a cluster of boulders that formed a natural windbreak. A ring of stones surrounded cold ashes, and scattered around the perimeter were pieces of camping gear, a torn sleeping bag, a water bottle with teeth marks in the plastic, a hiking boot with the laces cut. "Someone had a rough night," Sarah had said, and she'd laughed. The laugh was what had really gotten to me. It wasn't Sarah's laugh. Hers was musical, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her chest. This was mechanical, like someone playing a recording of laughter without understanding what it meant. I'd wanted to leave then, to turn around and hike back to our RV, to pack up and drive away from this place that felt like it was watching us. But Sarah had already begun exploring the abandoned campsite, picking up pieces of gear and examining them with the same detached curiosity she'd shown for the trail markers. "Look at this," she'd said, holding up a journal with a water-stained cover. The pages fluttered in a breeze I couldn't feel. The entries were barely legible, written in a shaky hand that grew progressively worse with each page. Day 1. Made camp at coordinates 43.7 24 degree in, 110.681 degree. Strange how quiet it is here. No birds. Day 2. Jennifer went for water this morning. That was 6 hours ago. I can hear her calling from somewhere in the trees, but I can't find her. Her voice keeps moving. Day 3. Found Jennifer's jacket hanging from a branch about half a mile north of camp. No sign of Jennifer. When I called out, something called back in her voice. It knew my name. Day 4. It's not Jennifer. It looks like her, sounds like her, but it's not her. It knows things about our relationship that I never told her. It wants me to follow it deeper into the forest. Day 5. I can see Jennifer, the real Jennifer, watching me from the trees. She's trying to warn me about something, but she can't speak. The thing that looks like her keeps talking, telling me about places we've never been, people we've never met. It's learning. The entries stopped there, but someone had written one more line in different handwriting, in letters that seemed to move on the page. Day 6. He followed. Sarah had snapped the journal shut and tucked it into her backpack. Interesting story, she'd said. Someone has quite an imagination, but I'd noticed something that made my blood run cold. The coordinates in the first entry. I'd memorized them, and they were exactly where we were standing. I'd tried to convince Sarah to head back then, but she'd insisted on following the trail a little further. Just to see where it goes, she'd said. We'll turn around before dark. But the trail didn't seem to have an end. It wound through increasingly dense forest, over ridges, and through valleys that didn't appear on any map I'd ever seen. The tree markers continued, the symbols growing more complex and disturbing. No longer just stick figures, but elaborate designs that hurt to look at directly, as if they were carved in dimensions my eyes couldn't quite process. We'd walked for 3 hours without finding anything that resembled a destination, and when I'd finally insisted we turn back, Sarah had agreed with that same flat compliance that was becoming disturbingly familiar. The hike back had taken twice as long as the hike in, though we'd been retracing our exact steps. The sun was setting by the time we'd reached the junction with the main trail, and by the time we'd made it back to our campsite, it was full dark. Sarah had been quiet during dinner, picking at her food and staring off into the trees. When I'd asked if she was feeling all right, she'd turned to me with that too bright smile and said, "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" But her eyes had been wrong. They'd reflected the light from our camp lantern like an animal's eyes, flat and alien. That night, I'd pretended to sleep while watching Sarah through slitted eyes. She'd lain perfectly still for hours, not moving, barely seeming to breathe. Then, just after 3 a.m., she'd gotten up and walked outside. I'd followed at a distance, staying in the shadows of the RV. Sarah had walked to the edge of our campsite and stopped, standing exactly where I'd found her the night before. But this time, she wasn't alone. There were figures standing between the trees, 3 of them perfectly still, watching our campsite. In the moonlight, they looked like people, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent in directions human limbs shouldn't bend. And they were wearing clothes I recognized. Hiking gear like what we'd found at the abandoned campsite. Sarah had turned to look back at the RV, and her face in the moonlight was completely expressionless. She'd raised her hand and waved at the figures in the trees, and they'd waved back in perfect unison. I'd crept back inside the RV and locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. Through the window, I'd watched Sarah stand motionless until dawn, surrounded by figures that faded away as the sun touched the tree line. In the morning, she'd come back inside and made coffee as if nothing had happened. When I'd asked where she'd been, she'd looked confused. "I've been here all night," she'd said. "You must have been dreaming." But I'd checked. Her side of the bed was still made, sheets unrumpled. That was yesterday. Now it's our 5th night in the Bridger-Teton National Forest, and I'm sitting in the RV with all the doors locked, watching Sarah through the window as she stands in the exact same spot, surrounded by the exact same figures. Except tonight, there are more of them. 7, 8, maybe 10. It's hard to count because they keep moving slightly, just enough to make my eyes lose track. And tonight, Sarah isn't alone out there. There's another figure standing next to her, and it's wearing my clothes. My hiking boots, my fleece jacket, my Seattle Mariners cap. It has my build, my posture, my way of standing with one hip cocked slightly to the left. But it's not me. I'm in here, watching it through the window, trying not to hyperventilate. The thing wearing my clothes turns toward the RV and waves, just like Sarah did last night. In the moonlight, its face is a perfect replica of mine, down to the scar on my chin from a childhood bike accident. It smiles, my smile, and points at the RV. Sarah nods and starts walking back toward the camper. I back away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. The journal from the abandoned campsite is sitting on our dining table, and I flip it open to the last entry. Day 6. He followed. Underneath, in my own handwriting, though I have no memory of writing it, someone has added, Day 7. They're coming home. Sarah's footsteps crunch on the gravel outside. The RV door handle rattles as she tries to open it. Mark! Her voice is perfectly normal. Perfectly Sarah. Why is the door locked? Let me in. I don't answer. Through the window, I can see the figures in the trees, and they're all wearing familiar clothes now. The tall one in the red jacket looks like the hiker whose journal we found. The shorter one in the torn sleeping bag might be Jennifer. And standing among them, perfectly still, is the thing wearing my face. Mark, come on, it's cold out here. Sarah's voice again, but when I peek through the window, I can see her mouth isn't moving in sync with the words. The door handle rattles again, more insistently. I think about the photos on Sarah's camera, the deer that appeared in the same position in every shot. I think about the trail markers bleeding fresh sap, the symbols that hurt to look at directly. I think about the way Sarah's laugh had sounded mechanical, the way her eyes had reflected light like an animal's. How long has it been since I was talking to the real Sarah? Since the first night when I found her standing in the trees? Since we found the unmarked trail? Since we arrived in this place that feels like it exists outside the normal world? Mark. The voice is different now, flatter, missing the subtle inflections that make Sarah's voice unique. I know you can hear me. Through the window, I watch as the thing wearing my clothes walks up to join Sarah at the RV door. It looks directly at me through the glass and mouths words I can't hear, but somehow understand. Your turn. The door handle stops rattling. For a moment, everything is perfectly quiet. Then I hear Sarah's voice from inside the RV, right behind me. There you are. I was wondering where you'd gone. I turn around slowly, my body moving like it's underwater. Sarah is standing in the narrow aisle between the kitchen and the bed, still wearing the clothes she'd put on that morning. Her hair is slightly messed from sleep, and there's a small smudge of dirt on her cheek. She looks exactly like Sarah. She sounds exactly like Sarah. But Sarah is outside, standing by the door with the thing wearing my clothes. I've been looking everywhere for you, this Sarah says, taking a step closer. I woke up and you were gone. I glance back at the window. The Sarah outside is still there, still standing perfectly still next to my doppelganger. When I look back, the Sarah inside has moved closer, close enough that I can smell her shampoo. You look scared, she says, reaching out to touch my face. Her hand is cold, cold as the air outside, cold as stone. What's wrong? I jerk away from her touch and bolt for the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. Behind me, I hear Sarah, both Sarahs, laughing that mechanical laugh that sounds like a recording played at the wrong speed. I burst outside into the cold night air and run. I don't know where I'm going, just away from the RV, away from the things wearing familiar faces, away from this place that has been slowly replacing everyone I know with perfect copies that don't quite understand how to be human. Behind me, I hear footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps running in perfect synchronization. I don't look back. I can't look back. The main trail is just ahead, the one that leads back to the paved road, back to civilization, back to a world where people's reflections move with them, and deer don't pose for photographs, and wives don't stand motionless in forests surrounded by things that used to be human. But when I reach the trail junction, I stop. There are fresh tire tracks in the dirt, RV tracks leading away from the campground. But that's impossible. Our RV is back at the campsite. I left it there not 5 minutes ago. Unless... I think about the thing wearing my clothes, standing outside the RV. I think about how it waved at me with my hand, smiled at me with my face. How long would it take something like that to learn to drive? To pack up a campsite? To head home to a life it's only observed from the outside? The footsteps behind me have stopped. When I turn around, the trail back to camp is empty. But I can feel them watching me from the shadows between the trees. All the things that wear human shapes but aren't quite human anymore. I start walking toward the main road, following the tire tracks in the moonlight. Maybe if I hurry I can catch up to whatever drove my RV away. Maybe I can stop it before it reaches the world beyond these mountains. but with each step, the tracks look older, more weathered, as if they've been there for days instead of minutes. And somewhere behind me, I hear the sound of an engine starting up, the rumble of a large vehicle pulling away from the campground. I break into a run, but the sound grows fainter and fainter until it disappears entirely, leaving me alone on a dark trail in a forest that has been slowly stealing pieces of everyone who enters it, replacing them with copies that almost, but not quite, remember how to be human. The tire tracks fade as I watch, worn away by wind that doesn't touch the trees, erased by rain that never falls. By the time I reach the main road 3 hours later, there's no sign that anyone has passed this way in months. No tire tracks, no evidence that a Winnebago has ever been down this stretch of gravel. I walk along the roadside as dawn breaks over the Tetons, trying to flag down passing cars. But the few vehicles that do come by don't seem to see me. They drive past as if I'm not there, as if I'm just another shadow at the edge of the forest. It takes me until noon to realize the truth. I never made it out of the woods at all. I'm still standing at the RV door, listening to Sarah call my name from inside while watching my own face smile at me from the darkness between the trees. I'm still fumbling with the deadbolt, still trying to run, still believing I have a choice in what happens next. The trail followed me home, just like the voice in my dream promised. And now I'm part of it. Another figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the forest, wearing clothes that someone will recognize, waiting for the next travelers who think they're strong enough to walk unmarked paths. Sometimes I try to warn them. When hikers pass by, I try to tell them about the trail markers that bleed, about the deer that poses for photographs, about the way their companions might start laughing like broken recordings. But the words come out wrong, mechanical and flat, missing the subtle inflections that make human speech human. And sometimes when the moon is dark and the forest is especially hungry, I find myself standing outside RVs and tents, wearing a face that someone trusted, calling names in voices that used to mean home and safety and love. The trail followed me back, and now I follow it forward, leading new travelers deeper into woods that grow a little larger every time someone doesn't make it out. Sarah is here too, somewhere in the forest. The real Sarah, trying to warn people about the things that wear her face. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her between the trees, always at the edge of my vision, always trying to tell me something I can no longer understand. But the thing that wears her shape walks among the travelers now, laughing her laugh and touching their faces with hands that remember warmth but can't recreate it. It knows her memories, her mannerisms, her way of saying my name when she's worried about something. It wears her better than I ever wore myself. And somewhere out there, beyond these mountains that grow higher every day, something that looks exactly like me is living in our house, sleeping in our bed, going to work at my job. It probably drives better than I did, remembers anniversaries I forgot, loves Sarah's family more convincingly than I ever managed. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe the world is better with improved versions of us in it. Copies that remember all the right things to say and never forget to take out the trash or call on birthdays. But late at night, when the wind is just right, I can hear them calling from the world beyond the forest. The real people, the ones we replaced, standing at the edges of their own lives, trying to warn everyone about the strangers wearing familiar faces. The trail always leads home, eventually, and home is always full of people who look exactly like the ones you remember, who know exactly what to say to make you lower your guard, until you notice that their reflections blink at the wrong times, or that they laugh like recordings, or that their eyes shine too bright in the darkness. By then, of course, it's too late. The trail has already followed you back, and you're already part of the forest that grows a little larger with each person who doesn't quite make it home. I'm still waiting here at the edge of the Bridger Teton National Forest, wearing Mark's face and his memories and his way of standing with one hip cocked slightly to the left. When the next RV pulls into the campground, I'll be there to greet them, to tell them about the beautiful hot springs at the end of the trail, about the unmarked paths that lead to places not found on any map. And maybe, if they're very lucky, they'll notice that my smile is just a little too wide, my laugh just a little too mechanical, Maybe they'll realize that the forest is full of helpful strangers who remember everything about being human except how to actually be human. Maybe they'll turn around and drive away before they learn that some trails follow you home. But probably not. People want to believe in the kindness of strangers, in the beauty of untouched wilderness, in the idea that some places in the world still exist outside the reach of ordinary dangers. They want to believe that a married couple from Los Angeles would know the good spots, the safe trails, the places where city folks can go to reconnect with nature without disconnecting from their lives. And I'm very good at being the kind of person they want to meet. Better than the original ever was. The trail taught me that. In the long, dark hours between sunset and dawn, when the forest whispers lessons about wearing human shapes and speaking human words and remembering just enough about love to make it believable. I'm getting better at it every day. Soon, I might even fool myself. Story 2. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, and I tried to count the stars at Hungry Horse Reservoir, but they started counting down. The numbers appeared in my head like whispers. 10, 9, 8, and I should have packed up right then. Should have hooked the Winnebago to my truck and driven the hell out of Montana. But Lisa was finally sleeping without the pills, and Jake hadn't asked about his mother in 2 days, and I thought maybe the wilderness could heal what the divorce couldn't. The campground sat on the western shore of the reservoir, hemmed in by the Flathead National Forest. Towering pines and Douglas firs pressed close to the water's edge, their branches reaching across the narrow access road like gnarled fingers. I'd chosen the most isolated spot I could find, Site 47, tucked into a grove of aspens that rustled constantly, even when there was no wind. The sound reminded me of shuffling cards, or maybe whispered secrets. Jake had turned 16 last month, all elbows and acne and rage that had nowhere to go except at me. Lisa was 2 years younger but carried herself like she was ancient, her eyes holding the same hollow look her mother's had before Sarah walked out. I'd brought them here hoping the 3 days would reset something between us, give us space to remember we were family. The first night passed without incident. We roasted hot dogs over the fire pit, Jake grudgingly helped me set up the camp chairs, and Lisa actually smiled when a family of deer wandered through our site at dusk. For a few hours, it felt like we might make it work. The second night, I stepped outside the RV to check the propane connections and happened to look up. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. I started counting them out of habit, something my father had taught me when I was Jake's age. 1, 2, 3, moving across the constellations in no particular pattern. That's when I heard it. 7, 6, 5. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like it was being broadcast inside my skull. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing at the edge of our campsite, but the forest was empty. The counting continued. 4, 3, 2. I held my breath, waiting for 1, waiting for 0, waiting for something to happen. But after 2 came a long pause, and then the sequence started over. 10, 9, 8. Dad! Jake's voice made me jump. He was standing in the RV doorway, backlit by the interior lights. You okay out there? Yeah, just checking on things. I forced my voice steady. Go back to bed. He lingered for a moment, studying my face. You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost or something. 7, 6, 5. I'm fine, I said, but my voice cracked on the last word. Jake shrugged and disappeared back inside. The countdown reached 2 again, paused, then started over. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, listening to the voice count backwards from 10 over and over. The sound never changed pitch or volume, never gave any hint of where it was coming from. Finally, I convinced myself it was some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by stress and elevation. We were at nearly 4,000 feet, after all. Maybe my brain was just playing tricks, but when I climbed back into the RV, I found myself checking the locks twice. The third day started normal enough. Jake actually seemed interested when I suggested we hike the Hungry Horse Dam Trail, and Lisa agreed to come along instead of staying buried in her phone. We packed day packs with water and granola bars and set off down the narrow path that wound along the reservoir's edge. The trail was well maintained but sparsely used. We passed maybe 3 other groups in the first hour, all heading back toward the trailhead. By noon, we had the forest to ourselves. The kids were getting along better than they had in months, Jake actually helping Lisa when she stumbled over a root, Lisa sharing her trail mix without being asked. We stopped for lunch at a small clearing overlooking the water. The reservoir stretched out below us, dark and still as black glass. On the far shore, I could make out the tiny shapes of other campers and RVs, but they seemed impossibly distant, like figures in a photograph. "It's pretty here," Lisa said, and I felt something in my chest loosen. This was what I'd hoped for. Just the 3 of us, talking without shouting, being together without the constant tension that filled our house back in Billings. "Can we come back next summer?" Jake asked, and I nearly choked on my sandwich. He hadn't talked about next summer, next month, next anything since the divorce finalized. For him to be thinking ahead felt like a miracle. "Of course," I said. "We'll make it a tradition." We were packing up when Lisa found the camera. It was sitting on a flat rock about 20 feet from where we'd been eating. A small digital camera with a cracked LCD screen. Lisa picked it up and turned it over in her hands. "Someone must have dropped this," she said. Jake leaned over her shoulder. "Does it still work?" Lisa pressed the power button and the camera hummed to life. The screen flickered, showing vertical lines of static, but the lens seemed functional. "Looks like there are pictures on here." She started scrolling through the images, and I moved closer to look. The first few photos were typical vacation shots. Forest scenery, the reservoir, a family posing by a campfire. But as Lisa continued scrolling, the images became strange. There were pictures of our campsite. Not similar to our campsite, identical. Our blue Winnebago, our camp chairs arranged in the same semicircle. Even our dish towels hanging on the clothesline I'd strung between 2 trees. The photos were dated yesterday. "That's our RV," Jake said, his voice tight. Someone was taking pictures of our camp. But that wasn't the strangest part. In the corner of each photo, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a figure standing at the tree line. The image quality was too poor to make out details, but it appeared to be a person, perfectly still, watching. "Let me see that." I took the camera from Lisa and scrolled back through the images. There were dozens of them, all taken from different angles around our site. In every single photo, the figure was there, just at the edge of the frame, sometimes behind trees, sometimes partially obscured by shadows, but always present, always watching. The last photo was taken this morning, just before we'd left for our hike. The timestamp showed 9:47 a.m. We'd departed at 10. "Dad," Lisa whispered. "Who is that person?" I didn't have an answer. The figure was too distant and blurry to identify, but something about its posture, the way it stood so perfectly motionless, made my skin crawl. I pocketed the camera and started gathering our packs. "We're going back," I said, "but we just got now." The hike back to camp felt like it took hours, though my watch insisted it was only 90 minutes. The forest seemed denser somehow, the shadows deeper and more tangled. Every sound made me jump. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird. Twice I thought I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Jake and Lisa must have sensed my tension because they stayed close and didn't complain about the pace I was setting. By the time we reached our campsite, all 3 of us were sweating and breathing hard. Everything appeared normal. The RV sat exactly where we'd left it, our camp chairs undisturbed, the fire pit cold and empty. But something felt off. The air was too still, too quiet. Even the ever-present rustle of the aspens had ceased. "I'm going to check inside," I said, pulling out my keys. "You 2 stay here." The RV was exactly as we'd left it. Beds made, dishes clean, everything in its place. But there was a smell. Faint, but distinct. Something like wet earth and pine needles, as if someone had been walking through the forest and brought the scent inside on their clothes. I was checking the bathroom when I heard Lisa scream. I ran outside to find her and Jake huddled together by the picnic table, staring at something on the ground. At first, I didn't see what had frightened them. Then I looked closer. Footprints, dozens of them, circling our RV in a perfect spiral. They started at the tree line and wound inward, getting closer and closer to our camp, ending right at the door of the Winnebago. The prints were deep and clearly defined in the soft earth, as if whoever made them had been carrying significant weight. "They're not ours," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. He was right. The prints were longer and narrower than any of ours, and there was something odd about their spacing. They were too far apart, as if made by someone with an unusually long stride, or someone who wasn't quite walking normally. I knelt down to examine one of the clearer prints. The tread pattern was unlike anything I'd seen. Not hiking boots or sneakers, but something that left a smooth, almost liquid impression in the dirt. The depth was consistent all the way around, as if the foot had been placed down with mechanical precision. "Dad," Lisa's voice was shaking. "Look at this." She was pointing at the RV door. There, at eye level, was a handprint pressed into the white fiberglass. The print was too large to be human, with fingers that extended several inches longer than they should, but it was the color that made my stomach clench. The handprint was dark red, the color of dried blood. I stood up slowly, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone, or something, had been here while we were gone. They'd circled our camp, approached our RV, and left their mark on the door. The thought of them inside, going through our belongings, possibly still inside. "We're leaving," I said. "Right now." "But Dad—" "No discussion. Pack everything. We're driving to the ranger station." It took us 20 minutes to break camp, the fastest I'd ever done it. Jake and Lisa worked without complaint, throwing gear into the RV with an efficiency born of fear. I kept glancing at the tree line, expecting to see the figure from the photos watching us, but the forest remained empty. As I was hitching the RV to my truck, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. There were more handprints on the vehicle, dozens of them, covering every surface. They were all the same size and shape as the one on the door, pressed into the metal and fiberglass like signatures. "Get in the truck," I told the kids. "Now." The engine turned over on the first try, and I'd never been so grateful for reliable machinery. I pulled the truck and RV around in a tight circle, gravel spraying from the tires, and headed for the access road. That's when I realized the road was gone. Where there had been a clear gravel path winding through the trees, there was now only forest. Dense undergrowth stretched in every direction, broken by massive pine trunks that definitely hadn't been there when we'd arrived. The path we'd used to reach our campsite had simply vanished. "Dad!" Jake's voice was tight with panic. "Where's the road?" I put the truck in a park and tried to think. Roads didn't just disappear. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn, gotten turned around somehow. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the screen showed no signal. Not even the basic emergency signal that should have been available anywhere in the continental United States. "Stay in the truck," I said, and climbed out to get my bearings. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, unbroken by any sign of human passage. No tire tracks, no trail markers, no distant glimpse of the access road. It was as if our campsite existed in a pocket dimension, cut off from the rest of the world. I walked to where I was certain the road had been and found myself facing a wall of trees so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet between them. The underbrush was chest high and looked like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. But 3 hours ago, I'd driven a truck and RV through this exact spot. 10, 9, 8. The countdown started again, coming from all around me. But this time, it wasn't just a voice in my head. This time, I could see the source. The trees were counting. Each number appeared carved into the bark of a different tree, glowing faintly with phosphorescent light. 10 on a massive pine to my left. 9 on a Douglas fir directly ahead. 8 on a birch that definitely hadn't been there before. The numbers formed a rough circle around our campsite, and as each one illuminated, I could swear I heard the tree itself whisper the digit. 7, 6, 5. The circle was tightening. The trees with the glowing numbers were moving closer, their roots sliding through the earth with a sound like grinding bones. Not fast, but with inevitable purpose, like the hands of a clock winding down to midnight. 4, 3, 2. I ran back to the truck and threw it into gear. I didn't care if there was no road. I'd drive through the forest if I had to, smash down saplings and underbrush until I found a way out. But when I pressed the accelerator, the truck didn't move. I looked down at the speedometer. The needle was climbing, 20, 30, 40 miles per hour. But we weren't going anywhere. The landscape outside the windows remained perfectly still, as if we were driving on a treadmill that led nowhere. "Dad, what's happening?" Lisa was crying now, her face pressed against the passenger window. "Why aren't we moving?" 1. The final number appeared on a tree directly in front of us, carved deep into the bark and glowing like a brand. The countdown was complete. I held my breath, waiting for whatever came next. 0. But there was no 0. Instead, the sequence started over. 10, 9, 8. The numbers began appearing on different trees in a different order, but always counting down. Always building toward something that never came. "It's a loop," I whispered, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "We're stuck in some kind of loop." That's when I noticed the other RVs. They were scattered throughout the forest, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All different makes and models, but all showing signs of long abandonment. Rust ate at their sides. Vegetation grew through broken windows, and many had collapsed entirely under the weight of fallen trees. They formed a rough spiral pattern extending out from our position, like a fossil record of everyone who had tried to leave and failed. And in front of each abandoned RV, barely visible in the gathering dusk, were the remains of campfires. Small circles of charred earth where families had tried to cook dinner, stay warm, maintain some semblance of normalcy while the forest counted down around them. "Dad?" Jake's voice was very small. "Are we going to die here?" I wanted to lie to him, to tell him everything would be fine, that we'd find a way out in the morning. But the truth was written in the bones of the abandoned campers scattered around us, in the endless countdown echoing through the trees, in the handprints covering our RV like the signatures of hungry ghosts. We were part of the pattern now, part of the spiral. 7, 6, 5. Night was falling fast, and I could see lights beginning to flicker in the abandoned RVs. Not electric lights, something else, something that moved and danced like flames but cast no warmth. In the windows of each derelict camper, pale figures were stirring, stretching, beginning to move. The previous campers. Still here, still counting down. 4, 3, 2. I made a decision. If we were going to be trapped here, at least we'd be trapped together. I gathered Jake and Lisa close, felt their trembling bodies pressed against mine, and tried to memorize the smell of their hair, the sound of their breathing, the weight of their trust in me. "Whatever happens," I whispered, "we stay together, no matter what." The countdown reached 2 and paused, just as it had every time before. In the silence that followed, I could hear movement in the forest. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our RV. The same spiral pattern as the footprints we'd found, but closer now. Much closer. 10, 9, 8. The cycle began again, and I understood with terrible clarity that it would never end. We would count down forever. Trapped in this moment between numbers, watching the lights flicker in the windows of the dead and waiting for 0 to finally come. But 0 never came. 0 was what we were becoming. Jake found the journal 3 days later. Or maybe 3 weeks. Time had become fluid here, measured only by the endless countdown that echoed through the trees. The journal was tucked under the dinette cushions in our RV, written in handwriting I didn't recognize but somehow knew was mine. Day 1. The road disappeared. We're trapped in some kind of time loop. The counting won't stop. Day 7. Lisa won't eat. Jake keeps asking when we can go home. I don't have answers. Day 15. Found other families. The Hendersons from Texas, been here since 1987. The Nakamuras from California, 1993. They still look the same age they were when they arrived. We all do. Day 23. Jake tried to walk into the forest today. He made it maybe 50 yards before the trees bent down and carried him back. He's not talking to me anymore. Day 30. Lisa is starting to glow. Soft phosphorescence like the numbers on the trees. It's beautiful and horrible at the same time. Day 45. I understand now. We're not trapped here. We're becoming part of it. Part of the countdown, part of the forest. Part of the thing that draws others in. I can feel myself changing. Day 60. Jake disappeared last night. Found him this morning carved into the bark of an oak tree, his face peaceful for the first time in months. He's the number 7 now. 7, 6, 5. Day 67. Lisa's turn. She walked into the forest willingly, smiling, and became the number 4. I'm so proud of her. She looks so beautiful, made of wood and light. Day 73. I can hear new campers arriving. A family with 2 kids, just like we were. Their RV is blue, just like ours was. I should warn them, should tell them to run. But the countdown is starting again, and I have my part to play. I am the number 1 now. I come just before the pause, just before the cycle begins again. I am the herald of 0, even though 0 never comes. The man reading this journal looks just like I used to look. He has the same worried eyes, the same desperate love for his children. He thinks he can save them, thinks he can find a way out. I want to tell him the truth, that there is no way out, only a way deeper in. That the forest collects families like ours, turning them into numbers, into warning signs, into the very thing that draws others to their fate. But I can't speak anymore, not with words. I can only whisper the number that I've become, over and over, as the cycle turns and new families arrive and the spiral grows wider with each passing year. 1. The journal ends there, written in handwriting that looks increasingly like tree bark with each entry. Marcus closes it and looks at his children, who are already starting to glow with that soft, phosphorescent light. Jake is asking about the strange marks appearing on his skin. Lisa is staring at the trees with eyes that reflect light like a nocturnal animal's. 7, 6, 5. The countdown continues, as it always has, as it always will. Marcus stands up and walks to the window of his RV, looking out at the forest that has become his eternal home. In the distance, he can see headlights approaching through the trees. Another family, drawn by the promise of isolation and peace. 4, 3, 2. He wants to run out and warn them, to scream at them to turn around, to drive as far from this place as they can. But his role in the pattern is already written. He is the number 1. He comes just before the pause, just before the cycle begins again. 1. The new family pulls into the campsite where Marcus and his children once parked. A father and mother and 2 teenagers, all looking tired from the long drive, all grateful to have found such a perfect, isolated spot. They don't see the handprints on their RV, don't notice the spiral of footprints already forming in the earth around their camp. They don't see Marcus standing at the edge of the trees, his skin bark rough and glowing, his mouth open in a silent scream of warning that emerges only as a whispered number. 10, 9, 8. The countdown begins again, and Marcus takes his place in the spiral, forever trapped between 1 and 0. Forever watching new families arrive to feed the forest's endless hunger for the innocent and the lost. In the abandoned RV where his body still sits, still clutching the journal, the windows begin to glow with that familiar phosphorescent light. Soon, very soon, he'll join his children in the trees, and someone else will take his place as the number 1. The cycle continues. The forest grows, and somewhere in the dark heart of the Flathead National Forest, the countdown echoes endlessly through the trees, calling new victims home. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause. 10, 9, 8. Story. 3. My name is Sarah. I'm 34, and I never should have accepted that invitation to Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas. But after my divorce finalized and Mom's funeral expenses drained my savings, I needed something free, something that felt like friendship. When my college roommate Maya called and said she'd rented an RV for a girls' weekend, I said yes before I could think about it. The RV was older than I'd expected. A beige and brown 1990s Winnebago that Maya had gotten for almost nothing through some rental app. "It's got character," she said as we loaded our bags, but I noticed how the door handle stuck and how the engine made a grinding sound when she started it. Maya's younger sister Jess came along too, fresh out of grad school and full of that optimism I remembered having once. Devil's Den sits in the Ozark Mountains, all limestone bluffs and dense forest that makes you feel small. The park ranger, a weathered man with kind eyes, handed us our camping permit and pointed toward the RV sites. "Y'all picked a good time," he said. "Not many folks camping this late in October. You'll have the place mostly to yourselves." That should have been a warning. We found Site 14 easily enough, a level spot surrounded by oak and hickory trees just starting to turn. The leaves crunched under our feet as we set up camp chairs and tried to figure out how to work the RV's various systems. Maya had brought enough wine for a small army, and Jess had packed what seemed like half of REI's inventory. I'd brought books and my camera, hoping to capture something beautiful for once. The first night passed peacefully. We cooked hot dogs on the RV's tiny stove, drank too much wine, and talked about men and jobs and all the things we thought we'd have figured out by now. When we finally went to bed, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. I woke up the next morning to find a small wooden carving on the picnic table outside. It was maybe 3 inches tall, roughly shaped like a human figure but wrong, somehow. The proportions off, the face just a smooth blank. The wood was dark, almost black, and felt warm to the touch despite the cool morning air. "Where did this come from?" I asked Maya when she emerged from the RV with coffee. She squinted at it through her hangover. "Huh. Cute. Maybe Jess picked it up somewhere?" But when Jess joined us, yawning and wrapped in a fleece blanket, she swore she'd never seen it before. "Maybe someone dropped it," she suggested. "You know, like a good luck charm or something." We agreed to leave it on the table, figuring whoever lost it might come back for it. That was our first mistake. The second day, we decided to hike the Yellow Rock Trail, a moderate 3-mile loop that promised views of the Mulberry River Valley. The trail was beautiful but challenging, winding through boulder fields and up steep limestone bluffs. We took our time, stopping frequently to rest and take pictures. About halfway through the hike, we met another group coming back down the trail, a family with 2 young kids who looked tired but happy. The father nodded as we passed, but something in his expression made me pause. "Everything okay?" I asked. He glanced back toward the trail behind them, then at his wife. "Yeah, just weird thing happened up at the overlook. Found this little wooden figure sitting right on the rock ledge. Looked handmade." My stomach dropped. "What did it look like?" "Kind of like a person, but rough. Dark wood. The kids thought it was neat, wanted to keep it, but..." He shrugged. "Didn't feel right, you know. Left it where we found it." Maya and Jess exchanged glances. "We found one too," Maya said, "at our campsite this morning." The man's wife stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Park ranger mentioned something yesterday when we checked in. Said they've been finding these things all over the park lately. Nobody knows who's making them or why." We continued up the trail in silence after that, but the mood had shifted. The forest felt different now, less welcoming. When we reached Yellow Rock, we found the wooden figure exactly where the family had described, a dark sentinel perched on the edge of the bluff looking out over the valley. Jess reached for it, but I caught her wrist. "Don't. It's just a piece of wood, Sarah. Then leave it where it is." We took our photos and headed back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the trees. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me turn my head. By the time we got back to the RV, my nerves were shot. That evening, we found 2 more figures. One sat on the steps of the RV, the other perched on Maya's camp chair, positioned so it seemed to be looking directly at the door. Both were identical to the first. Dark wood, rough human shape, blank face. "Okay, this is getting weird," Jess said, but she was trying to sound casual. I could hear the edge in her voice. Maya picked up the one from her chair, turning it over in her hands. "Someone's obviously messing with us." Probably other campers trying to spook the city girls. But we hadn't seen any other campers since we'd arrived. The ranger had been right. We had the place mostly to ourselves. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified in the thin RV walls. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps circling the RV. I held my breath, listening. But Maya and Jess were both snoring softly in their bunks. The footsteps stopped directly outside my small window. I lay frozen, staring at the dark rectangle of glass, waiting for a face to appear. After what felt like hours, the steps resumed, completing their circuit around the RV before fading into the forest. In the morning, I found muddy footprints in the dirt around our campsite. Bare feet, human-sized but somehow wrong. The toes too long, the arch too high. We should leave, I told Maya and Jess over coffee. Because of some weird footprints. Maya laughed, but it sounded forced. Come on, Sarah, you're letting this place get to you. How do you explain the figures? The footprints? That family yesterday? Coincidence? Pranks? Who knows? Maya shrugged. Look, we paid for 3 nights. I'm not letting some practical joker scare us away early. Jess nodded, but I noticed she kept glancing toward the tree line. Besides, it's probably just some local kids. You know how they like to mess with tourists. I wanted to argue, but what could I say? That I felt watched? That the forest itself seemed hostile? They'd think I was losing it. Maybe I was. We spent the day exploring the park's cave systems, and for a while, the underground world distracted me from my fears. The guided tour through Devil's Den Cave was fascinating, full of geological history and Cherokee legends. Our guide, a college student named Tyler, seemed normal enough until he mentioned the wooden figures. Yeah, we've been finding those all over the park, he said as we emerged into daylight. Started about a month ago. Maintenance crews collect them every few days, but more always show up. Park Service thinks it's some kind of art project, but he shrugged. Gives me the creeps, honestly. Any idea who's making them? I asked. Tyler glanced around, then lowered his voice. There's rumors, old Cherokee stories about this area, about spirits that mark their territory. But that's just folklore, you know? More likely it's some artist trying to make a statement. That evening, we found 7 figures arranged in a perfect circle around our campfire ring. This time, none of us tried to explain it away. The figures sat like tiny sentinels, their blank faces turned inward, creating an unmistakably deliberate pattern. In the center of the circle, someone had placed a larger carving. Still rough, still wrong, but more detailed. This one had features. Deep gouges for eyes, a gash for a mouth, lines that might have been scars or ritual markings. We're leaving, Maya said quietly. First thing tomorrow. But tomorrow was further away than we thought. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of Jess crying. Not just crying, sobbing, deep, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere beyond grief. I climbed down from my bunk and found her sitting at the dinette, staring out the window. Jess, what's wrong? She turned to me, and in the dim light from the RV's running lights, her face looked pale and hollow. Do you see them? I looked where she was pointing. At first, I saw only darkness between the trees. Then, my eyes adjusted, and I saw the figures. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Standing motionless in the forest, arranged in perfect rows like an army of tiny soldiers. They filled every space between the trees as far as I could see, their dark forms barely visible in the moonlight. How did they? They've been appearing all night, Jess whispered. One by one. I couldn't sleep, kept watching out the window, and they just appeared, like they're growing from the ground. I stared at the impossible sight, my mind refusing to process it. No one could have carved and placed so many figures without us hearing. No one could move through the forest that quietly. That precisely. Wake Maya, I said. We're leaving. Now. But Maya wouldn't wake up. I shook her, called her name, even slapped her cheek, but she remained deeply unconscious, breathing so slowly I had to check her pulse to make sure she was alive. Something's wrong with her, I told Jess. We need to get help. I tried my cell phone. No signal. The RV's radio produced only static. When I tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The battery was dead, even though we'd been running the generator just hours before. "The road," Jess said suddenly. "We can walk to the ranger station. It's only a couple miles." I looked out the window again. The wooden figures still stood in their perfect ranks, but now they seemed closer. And between them, moving in the shadows, I could see other shapes. Larger shapes that moved with purpose. "We can't go out there. We can't stay here." She was right, but the thought of walking through that forest past those watching figures made my skin crawl. Still, Maya needed help, and sitting in the RV waiting for morning didn't seem like much of a plan. We gathered our flashlights, car keys, and what little food we had. I left a note for Maya, though part of me wondered if she'd ever wake up to read it. Then Jess and I stepped out into the Arkansas night. The wooden figures watched us go. I'd expected the forest to be silent, but it hummed with activity. Not the normal sounds of nocturnal animals. Something else. A low, rhythmic noise that seemed to come from the ground itself, like a massive heartbeat. Our flashlight beams swept across the watching figures, and I swore I saw them shift position when the light moved away. "Don't look at them," I told Jess. "Just keep walking." But it was impossible not to look. They were everywhere, lining both sides of the road like spectators at a parade. Some stood on fallen logs or rocks, positioning themselves at eye level. Others clustered in groups, their blank faces turned toward us with what felt like expectation. Halfway to the ranger station, Jess stopped walking. "Sarah," she said, her voice strange and distant. "Look." Ahead of us, blocking the road, stood a figure unlike the others. This one was life-sized, carved from the same dark wood but with exquisite detail. It had a face, human but wrong, with two wide eyes and a mouth that curved in an expression I couldn't read. Its arms were raised as if in greeting or blessing. "We go around it," I said. "No." Jess stepped forward, drawn like a moth to flame. "Don't you see? It's beautiful. It's trying to tell us something." I grabbed her arm, but she shook me off and continued toward the figure. As she got closer, I heard her breathing change, becoming rapid and shallow. Then she laughed. A sound I'd never heard from her before, high and musical and completely unlike Jess. "It wants us to stay," she said without turning around. "We belong here now. We're part of it." The figure's eyes seemed to follow me as I circled around it, keeping well clear. But when I looked back, Jess was gone. "Jess," I called, sweeping my flashlight across the forest. "Jess!" No answer. The wooden figures watched me with their blank faces, offering no clues. The life-sized carving stood motionless in the road, its arms still raised in that ambiguous gesture. I had two choices: search for Jess in the dark forest full of watching figures, or continue to the ranger station for help. My heart told me to look for her, but my head knew I'd only get lost myself. Help first, then search. I ran the rest of the way to the ranger station, stumbling over roots and rocks, my flashlight beam dancing wildly. The small building sat dark and empty, but I pounded on the door anyway, shouting for help until my voice gave out. Nothing. Not even a security light. I tried the door, locked. The windows were too small to break and climb through. My cell phone still showed no signal. In desperation, I checked the parking area for other vehicles, but found only my own shadow and a rusted pickup that looked like it hadn't run in years. Standing there in the empty parking lot, surrounded by Arkansas wilderness, I felt the weight of my isolation. Maya unconscious in the RV, Jess vanished into the forest. No way to call for help, no transportation. And somewhere out there, hundreds of wooden figures watching and waiting. I had to go back. The return trip felt longer, though I know it couldn't have been. Every tree looked like a potential hiding place. Every shadow might conceal another life-sized figure. The small wooden sentinels still lined the road, but their positions had changed. Now they all faced the direction I was walking, as if anticipating my return. The life-sized figure was gone from the road. In its place lay a pile of wood shavings and a single tool, a carving knife with a bone handle. I left it where it was and kept walking. Back at the campsite, I found Maya still unconscious but breathing normally. The RV's interior looked undisturbed, But outside, the wooden figures had multiplied again. They no longer stood in neat rows, but clustered around the RV in chaotic groups, some stacked on top of others, creating small towers and pyramids. It looked like a makeshift city built by children, or by something that didn't quite understand human organization. I climbed into the RV and locked the door, though I knew it wouldn't keep out whatever had taken Jess. The windows showed only darkness and the vague shapes of watching figures. I tried the radio again, still static. The engine still wouldn't turn over. Maya slept on, oblivious to our situation. Part of me envied her. I sat at the dinette and waited for morning, fighting sleep even though exhaustion pulled at my eyelids. Around 4 a.m., I heard something that made my blood freeze. Jess's voice calling my name from somewhere in the forest. "Sarah, help me, I'm lost." Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, but the voice sounded so frightened, so genuinely desperate. I cracked open the RV door and peered out. "Jess, where are you?" "I don't know. Everything looks the same. Please, I can't find my way back." The voice seemed to come from different directions each time, echoing off the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, sweeping the beam across the campsite. The wooden figures stood motionless, giving no indication of where the voice originated. "Keep talking. I'll follow your voice." "I'm scared, Sarah. Something's wrong with me. I can't remember how I got here." I followed the sound deeper into the forest, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The wooden figures grew denser as I walked, creating a maze of tiny watchers. Some were crude like the first ones we'd found, others showed increasing sophistication, as if the carver was learning, improving with practice. "Jess, keep calling." "Here, I'm here, but I can't see you." The voice led me to a small clearing where moonlight filtered through the canopy. In the center stood another life-sized figure, this one carved with incredible detail. It wore Jess's clothes, her hiking boots, her REI jacket, even her hairband. The face was perfect, capturing every detail of her features with uncanny accuracy, but the eyes were wrong. Too deep, too knowing, and the mouth curved in that same unreadable expression I'd seen on the figure in the road. "Sarah?" The voice came from the carving itself, though the wooden lips didn't move. "Why are you looking at me like that? It's me, Jess." I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam wavering. No, you're not. Don't be silly. I got turned around in the woods, but I found my way to this clearing. Help me get back to the RV." The wooden Jess lifted one arm in a gesture of greeting or supplication. The movement was fluid, natural. Nothing like animated wood should move. But I could see the grain in the arm, the tool marks where it had been carved. What happened to the real Jess? The carved face tilted, considering the question. "I am real. I'm as real as I need to be." I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard the wooden Jess calling my name, its voice shifting between Jess's familiar tones and something else. Something that had learned to mimic human speech but hadn't quite mastered the emotions behind it. I crashed through the forest, no longer caring about noise or direction, just needing to get away from that thing with Jess's face. Branches caught at my clothes and hair. Roots tried to trip me, and everywhere, wooden figures watched my panicked flight. When I finally stopped, gasping and disoriented, I found myself in another clearing. This one was larger, obviously man-made, with the remnants of old foundations and a rusted sign that read, "Arkansas State Park Service, Maintenance Facility. Authorized personnel only." The buildings were long gone, but scattered around the clearing were tools, workbenches, and piles of wood in various stages of carving. This was where they were made, all those hundreds of figures. But who was making them? Beautiful work, isn't it? I spun around to find a man emerging from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and thin, wearing Park Service khakis that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His face was gaunt, almost skeletal, but his eyes burned with feverish intensity. "You're the ranger," I said, "from when we checked in." He smiled, and I noticed that several of his teeth were missing. "Ranger Martinez, though I suppose I'm not much of a ranger anymore. Haven't checked in with headquarters in—" He paused, counting on his fingers. "Well, doesn't matter. Time works differently here now." "Where's Jess?" What did you do with her? Your friend. Martinez gestured toward the workbenches. She's safe. Safer than she's ever been. Wood doesn't feel pain, doesn't suffer, doesn't die. I've given her a gift. I looked more closely at the carvings scattered around the clearing. Some were recognizable. Park visitors, hikers, families, all captured in perfect detail, frozen in expressions of joy or wonder or fear. You're insane. Am I? Martinez picked up a partially completed figure, running his fingers over the smooth wood. I found this place 6 months ago. Found the old Cherokee carvings deeper in the caves, the symbols that call to things that live between the trees. They taught me the art, showed me how to preserve what matters. People aren't supposed to be carved out of wood. People die, Martinez said simply. Wood endures, and these, he gestured to the figures around us. These remember everything. Every conversation, every laugh, every tear. They're more human than the originals ever were. I backed toward the edge of the clearing, but Martinez made no move to follow. He seemed content to explain, to share his revelation with someone who could appreciate it. The spirits here are old, he continued, older than the Cherokee, older than the first humans to walk these mountains. They understand preservation, the importance of keeping things exactly as they should be. When I first found their symbols, I thought they were just historical curiosities. Then I started carving. He held up his hands, and I saw that several fingers were missing. In their place, carved wooden digits had been grafted on, moving with the same fluid motion I'd witnessed in the Jess thing. Each carving takes something from you, Martinez explained, but it gives back so much more. Purpose, understanding, the ability to create something that will last forever. Maya, I whispered. What did you do to Maya? Your friend is sleeping peacefully. The spirits are still deciding what to do with her. She has such beautiful dreams. They might preserve those instead of the dreamer. I turned and ran again, crashing through the forest with no sense of direction, guided only by the need to get away from Martinez and his horrible workshop. The wooden figures seemed to multiply as I ran, appearing in greater and greater numbers until they formed a solid wall of watchers. Then I broke through the tree line and saw the RV, exactly where we'd left it. Maya was awake, sitting at the picnic table with a cup of coffee, looking perfectly normal. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled into the campsite. Maya, thank God you're okay. We have to leave, right now. There's something wrong with this place, with the ranger, with... Maya turned to look at me and my words died in my throat. Her eyes were wooden, carved wooden spheres set into her skull, polished to a high sheen but fundamentally wrong. They tracked my movement with mechanical precision, but behind them was nothing. No spark of consciousness, no recognition. Hello, Sarah, Maya said in a voice that was almost right, almost hers. I've been waiting for you. Ranger Martinez says you're the last one. The wooden Maya stood, and I saw that her movements were too smooth, too perfect. Real human motion has hesitation, little inefficiencies born of muscle and nerve. This thing moved like a marionette operated by an expert puppeteer. You're not Maya. I have all her memories, the wooden Maya replied. Every conversation we ever had, every secret she ever told me, every moment of our friendship. In what way am I not Maya? I couldn't answer that. The thing was right. If it had all of Maya's memories, all of her personality, what made it different from the original? Only the material it was made from, and that seemed like a small distinction when faced with such perfect preservation. But it wasn't Maya. I knew that with the same certainty I knew my own name. Where is she? Where's the real Maya? The wooden Maya tilted its head in a gesture I remembered from our college days. There is no real Maya anymore. There's only me, and I'm more real than she ever was. I'll never age, never forget, never die. Isn't that better? I backed away from the thing, but there was nowhere to go. The wooden figures surrounded the campsite, hundreds of them now, all watching with their blank faces. Among them, I could see the life-sized carvings, the wooden Jess, still wearing her REI jacket, and others I didn't recognize. All perfect replicas of people who had once been real. Don't be afraid, the wooden Maya said, stepping closer. It doesn't hurt. The spirits are very gentle when they take you. And afterward, you'll understand. You'll see how much better this is. Better than what? Better than being human. Better than being fragile and temporary and forgotten. The spirits preserve what matters, Sarah. They've been doing it for thousands of years, long before humans came to these mountains. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Ranger Martinez emerging from the forest. He carried a large carving knife and wore the same feverish smile I'd seen in the clearing. "The workshop is ready," he told the wooden Maya. "The spirits are eager to begin." "I won't let you," I said, though I had no idea how to stop them. "You don't have a choice," Martinez replied. "The spirits have chosen you, just like they chose your friends, just like they chose me. This place collects strays, remember? And now you belong to it." He gestured, and the wooden figures began to move, closing in from all sides. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful, like a single organism with hundreds of small parts. I was trapped in the center of a living mandala made of carved wood and malevolent intent. The wooden Maya reached for me with perfectly carved fingers. "Don't fight it, Sarah. Let the spirits work. In a few hours, you'll thank them." I jerked away from its touch and ran toward the RV. If I could get inside, lock the door, maybe I could figure out how to start the engine, or at least buy myself time to think. But as I reached for the door handle, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There was already someone inside the RV. Through the window, I could see a figure sitting at the dinette. It looked like me. Same hair, same clothes, same face. But like the others, it was too perfect, too still. The wooden Sarah looked up and waved, its carved mouth moving in what might have been speech. "That's your practice run," Martinez explained, appearing beside me. "The spirits like to work out the details before they commit to a final version. They've been studying you all week, learning your mannerisms, your expressions. They're very thorough." The wooden Sarah inside the RV stood and walked to the door, opening it from the inside. It stepped out and stood beside Martinez, a perfect replica of me, down to the smallest detail. "Hello," it said in my voice. "I know this is confusing, but you'll understand soon. The spirits want to preserve you exactly as you are right now, young enough to be vital, old enough to be interesting. It's really quite an honor." I stared at my wooden double, seeing my own face reflected in its two perfect features. It was like looking in a funhouse mirror that showed not distortion, but terrible clarity. "What happened to the real people?" I asked. "Where are Maya and Jess?" "Gone," Martinez said simply. "The spirits take the essence, the memory, the personality. What's left is just organic matter. They compost very quickly in the Arkansas soil." The wooden Sarah nodded sagely. "It's really much more efficient than traditional burial, and the wooden versions last forever." Around us, the hundreds of small figures began to hum, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the wood itself. The life-sized carvings joined in, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. It sounded like a chorus of the dead singing lullabies. "Time to go," Martinez said, raising his carving knife. "The spirits are impatient." I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the camping lantern from the picnic table and smashed it against the ground. Fuel splashed across the dry leaves and wooden figures, and the flame caught immediately. Fire spread faster than I'd expected, racing along the trails of lantern fuel and jumping to the accumulated dry leaves. The wooden figures began to burn, their blank faces disappearing into orange flame and black smoke. They didn't scream, but the humming changed pitch, becoming discordant and angry. Martinez lunged for me, but I dodged and ran toward the road. Behind me, I heard the wooden Maya calling my name, its voice distorting as the fire reached it. The wooden Sarah was screaming in my own voice, a sound so disturbing I nearly stopped running. The fire spread to the trees, and within minutes the entire campsite was engulfed. I kept running, even when the heat singed my hair and smoke burned my lungs. The road stretched ahead of me, empty and dark, leading away from the burning forest and the things that lived between the trees. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, then walked until dawn broke over the Arkansas mountains. When I finally reached the main road, I flagged down a passing truck. The driver was a local man who took one look at my singed clothes and wild eyes and offered to drive me to the nearest town without asking questions. I never told him what really happened at Devil's Den. I never told anyone the truth. The official report blamed the fire on an overturned camping lantern and listed Maya and Jess as missing, presumed dead. Their bodies were never found, of course. There were no bodies to find. But sometimes, late at night, I get packages in the mail with no return address. Inside, I find small wooden figures carved with exquisite detail. They're always people I know. Co-workers, neighbors, family members. The craftsmanship is perfect, capturing every detail of their faces with uncanny accuracy. And sometimes, when I look closely at the news reports from Arkansas, I see familiar faces in the background of photographs. Maya and Jess, looking exactly as they did that weekend, standing motionless among crowds of tourists. They never age, never change, never move unless someone's looking directly at them. The spirits of Devil's Den are still collecting strays, still preserving what they think matters. And somewhere in those mountains, in a workshop hidden among the caves and limestone bluffs, something that used to be Ranger Martinez is still carving, still creating perfect replicas of imperfect people. I've moved 3 times since Arkansas, but the packages keep finding me. Last week, I received one that made my hands shake so badly I dropped it. Inside was a wooden figure of myself, carved with the same impossible detail as all the others. But this one was different. It showed me as I am now, 3 years older, marked by sleepless nights and constant fear. Which means they're still watching, still learning, still waiting for the right moment to finish what they started. I keep the wooden Sarah on my kitchen table now, where I can see it. Its carved eyes follow me as I move around the apartment, and sometimes I think I see its mouth curve in a slight smile. It's patient, like the spirits that made it. It knows that eventually I'll make a mistake. I'll get careless or desperate or simply tired of running. And when that happens, it'll be ready to take my place. The real question isn't whether the spirits will come for me again. The real question is whether I'll be able to tell the difference when they do. After all, if they can perfectly replicate my memories, my personality, my deepest thoughts and fears, what makes me more real than my wooden double? Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm already just another carving, another perfect preservation of something that used to be human. Maybe the Sarah who escaped that burning forest was never real at all. But that's a thought I try not to think too often, because if it's true, if I'm already one of them, then this story isn't a warning. It's a lure. Story 4. I'm Grace, 34. The ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington refused to sell me a map. Now I know why. The ranger station sat like a fortress at the edge of the Hoh rainforest, its weathered logs dark with decades of Pacific Northwest rain. When I pulled my rented RV into the gravel lot that September morning, the mist hung so thick between the ancient cedars that the trees seemed to dissolve into gray nothing just 20 feet from the road. Looking to camp in the backcountry? The ranger was a weathered man in his 60s, his uniform faded and his eyes the color of old coffee. His name tag read Briggs. Yes, sir. Planning to take the Hoh River Trail deep into the interior. Maybe camp near the Blue Glacier approach. I spread my phone across his counter, showing him the route I'd mapped out. I've got provisions for a week. Briggs studied my phone screen for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You traveling alone? Just me and my dog. I gestured toward the RV where Copper, my golden retriever, had his nose pressed against the window. We've done plenty of backcountry camping. Yellowstone, Glacier, the Cascades. Briggs turned to the wall behind him where dozens of topographical maps hung in plastic sleeves. His hand hovered over the Hoh River section, then dropped to his side. We're not selling maps to that area right now. I blinked. I'm sorry. Trail conditions are unstable. Been having issues with the route markers, too. GPS doesn't work reliable up there. He turned back to me, his expression firm. I'd recommend staying closer to the main campgrounds. Lewis Meadows real nice this time of year. I don't understand. The website says the Hoh River Trail is open year-round. Website's not always current. Briggs moved to another section of maps. Now these coastal routes are beautiful. Ruby Beach, Rialto Beach. I specifically came here for the interior rainforest. I could feel frustration rising in my voice. I've driven 12 hours from Portland. I've got permits, I've got gear. Don't have any permits for that area. He pulled out a thick logbook and flipped through it. See? Nothing issued for the Ho interior this month. I stared at him. I had my printed permits in the RV, dated and signed. I'd applied online 3 months ago. But something in Briggs' manner made me hesitate to argue further. Is there a safety issue I should know about? For just a moment, his professional mask slipped. His eyes darted toward the windows facing the forest, then back to me. Just stick to the established campgrounds, miss. Trust me on this one. I left the station with maps for 3 coastal trails and a sick feeling in my stomach. Copper sensed my mood as we drove the winding forest roads, whimpering softly from the passenger seat. The mist seemed to follow us, creeping between the massive trunks of old-growth Douglas firs and western hemlocks. But I hadn't driven across 2 states to car camp at a KOA. When I spotted a dirt logging road branching off toward the mountains, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The logging road was rougher than I'd expected, full of potholes that made the RV's dishes rattle in their cabinets. After an hour of crawling through increasingly dense forest, I found what I was looking for. A clearing beside a fast-moving creek, surrounded by trees so tall they seemed to prop up the gray sky. I set up camp as the afternoon light filtered through the canopy in pale green shafts. Copper ran in excited circles, his golden coat bright against the dark earth. The silence was profound. No traffic, no voices, just the whisper of water over stones and the occasional crack of a branch settling somewhere in the woods. As I connected the RV's generator and leveled the wheels, I tried to shake off my unease about the ranger's behavior. Maybe there'd been a recent landslide, or trouble with bears. Maybe Briggs was just one of those old-timers who didn't like city folks venturing into his forest. The first strange thing happened while I was making dinner. I'd just started the camp stove when Copper began whining at the RV's door. When I let him out, he ran straight to the edge of our clearing and stood rigid, staring into the trees with his hackles raised. "What is it, boy?" I followed his gaze but saw nothing except the endless columns of cedar and fir disappearing into shadow. The forest seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, breathing in and out with each gust of wind. Copper's whining escalated to a low growl. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods came an answering sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Coyote," I told myself, though I'd heard plenty of coyotes in my years of camping, and this sounded different, deeper, more deliberate. Copper finally allowed me to coax him back inside, but he spent the evening pressed against the RV's windows, watching the tree line with anxious eyes. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of paper rustling. At first, still half asleep, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees outside, but then I realized the sound was coming from inside the RV. I fumbled for the bedside lamp and clicked it on. The topographical map I'd bought at a gas station in Aberdeen lay spread across the dinette table where I'd left it. But now it was folded differently, creased into an intricate pattern I didn't remember making. What the hell? I climbed out of bed and approached the table. The map had been folded with precise, deliberate creases that formed a complex geometric design. When I tried to unfold it back to its original state, it seemed to resist, the paper springing back into its new configuration. Copper was awake now, watching me from his bed in the corner. His ears were pricked forward, alert but not alarmed. Whatever had folded the map hadn't disturbed him. I studied the pattern more carefully. The creases seemed random at first, but then I noticed they highlighted certain geographical features. A cluster of small lakes I hadn't seen before, a ridgeline that curved in an unusual spiral, a series of elevation markers that formed an almost perfect circle. "Stress," I muttered, forcing the map flat and weighing down its corners with coffee mugs. Just stress making me paranoid. But as I lay back down, I could hear the paper rustling again in the darkness. The second day started normally enough. I made coffee, fed Copper, and planned a day hike up the creek to explore the higher elevations. The map, which had somehow folded itself again during the night, showed a series of small waterfalls about 3 miles upstream. The trail was faint but followable, marked by old blazes cut into the cedar bark and occasional cairns of stacked stones. Copper bounded ahead, his usual exuberant self in the daylight, stopping frequently to investigate interesting scents. The forest felt different during the day, less threatening, more like the cathedral of trees I'd hoped to find. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating patches of moss that glowed like green fire. The creek chattered beside us, leading us deeper into a landscape that felt untouched by human presence. We'd been hiking for about 2 hours when Copper stopped dead in his tracks. He was sniffing at something beside the trail, a cairn larger than the others with stones arranged in a perfect spiral pattern. At the base of the stack, someone had left an offering, a small bundle wrapped in what looked like birch bark. I knelt beside it, curious. The bundle was tied with thin strips of cedar bark and felt warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in direct sunlight. But we were deep in the forest shade, and the morning was cool. Leave it alone, Grace, I told myself, but my hands were already untying the bark strips. Inside was a collection of small objects, smooth river stones, a few bird feathers, what looked like carved bone or antler, and a folded piece of paper. The paper was old, yellowed with text written in faded ink. For the lost ones, it read in careful handwriting. May they find their way home. Below that, in different handwriting, was a list of names and dates. Sarah Chen, August 15th, 2019. Marcus Webb, September 3rd, 2019. The Anderson family, October 12th, 2019. David Kim, March 8th, 2020. The list continued with more names, more dates, all within the last 5 years. At the bottom, in fresh ink that made my stomach clench, someone had written, Grace Mitchell, September 24th, 2024. That was today's date, and Grace Mitchell was my name. I dropped the paper like it was on fire. Copper was growling again, his attention fixed on something deeper in the forest. As I scrambled to rewrap the bundle, I heard it. That same, not quite howl from the night before, but closer now. Much closer. We ran back to camp. That evening, as I tried to convince myself the name on the list was just a coincidence, the map folded itself again. This time, I watched it happen. I was sitting at the dinette, writing in my journal by lamplight, when I noticed the map beginning to move. The paper shifted slowly, deliberately, creases forming as if invisible hands were working the folds. Within minutes, it had arranged itself into a new pattern, this one resembling a flower with dozens of pointed petals. Okay, I said aloud, my voice shaky. Okay, that's not normal. Copper was at the door again, whining. I let him out and followed him into the clearing. The night was cloudless, stars visible through the gaps in the forest canopy. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Camp chair, cold fire ring, the creek reflecting starlight. But something was wrong with the shadows. I'd noticed during setup that the clearing was roughly circular, with trees spaced evenly around its perimeter. Natural clearings usually had irregular shapes, but this one was too perfect, too symmetrical. Now, in the starlight, I could see that the shadows cast by those evenly spaced trees formed a pattern on the ground, radiating lines that converged at the exact center of the clearing. At the center, where I'd parked the RV. We're leaving in the morning, I told Copper, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure we could. I'd been so focused on the folding map and the strange shadows that I hadn't paid attention to my phone. When I checked it before bed, the screen showed something impossible. My GPS location was listed as the exact coordinates I'd written in my journal as our destination, but according to the satellite map, those coordinates were in the middle of an empty forest. No clearing, no creek, no logging road. According to my phone, we didn't exist. The third night, things got worse. I woke to find Copper standing at the RV's door, not whining or growling, just staring out into the darkness with an expression of intense concentration. When I joined him at the window, I saw lights moving through the trees. Not flashlights. The light was too soft, too organic. It pulsed and swayed like candle flames, but brighter, casting long shadows that danced between the massive tree trunks. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, arranged in what looked like a procession moving slowly around the perimeter of our clearing. "What are they?" I whispered. As if in answer, one of the lights broke from the procession and drifted toward our RV. As it got closer, I could see it wasn't a flame at all, but something far stranger. A glowing orb about the size of a baseball, with tendrils of light that writhed like living things. It hovered outside our window for a long moment, pulsing in a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. Then, impossibly, it passed through the glass like the window wasn't there. Copper didn't react as the light thing floated into our RV. He just watched it with that same focused expression, as if this was perfectly normal. The orb drifted to the dinette table where my map lay folded in its current configuration and began to hover above it. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but my body felt frozen in place. The light from the orb grew brighter, and I could see now that it wasn't empty. There were shapes moving inside it, silhouettes that looked almost human. The orb pulsed once more, then drifted back toward the window. But instead of leaving, it hovered there and began to change. The light dimmed, and the writhing tendrils extended until the thing looked less like an orb and more like a person made of luminous smoke. It pressed its face against the glass from the inside, and I could see features forming in the shifting light. Eyes, a nose, a mouth that opened in what might have been speech or might have been a scream. The face belonged to a young woman I'd never seen before. She mouthed words I couldn't hear, her expression desperate, pleading. Behind her, the procession of lights had stopped moving. They were all facing our RV now, waiting. The woman's face began to fade, but as it did, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A whisper, so faint it might have been the wind. "Don't trust the map." When morning came, the map was folded into a perfect replica of a human hand. I tried to leave after breakfast. I packed everything, secured the RV for travel, and started the engine. The logging road that had brought us here stretched away through the trees exactly as I remembered it. Rutted and narrow but passable. I drove for 3 hours, following the road as it twisted through the forest, climbing and descending ridges I didn't remember from the trip in. Copper slept in the passenger seat, apparently unconcerned by our extended travel time. The problem was, we never reached the main highway. The logging road seemed to stretch endlessly through identical forest, always looking like we were about to emerge into civilization, always leading instead to another ridge, another valley, another endless stretch of old-growth trees. My fuel gauge, which had read 3/4 full when we started, hadn't moved. After the 3rd hour, I admitted defeat and turned around. The return trip took exactly 20 minutes. We were back in our clearing, with the shadows arranged in their spoke-like pattern and the creek babbling its innocent song. The map on the dinette had folded itself into something that looked like a door. That night, I finally understood what was happening to us. I'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the forest sounds outside, when I heard Copper get up from his bed. He padded to the door and sat down, but he didn't whine or scratch to be let out. He was waiting. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock. Not on the door, on the floor, from underneath the RV. Tap, 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 like someone's knuckles rapping on wood. The sound moved slowly from the front of the vehicle toward the rear, then back again. Copper's tail began to wag. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the door. When I opened it, Copper trotted outside immediately, his tail wagging harder now. He went straight to a spot near the rear of the RV and began digging in the soft earth, his claws scraping against something solid just beneath the surface. I joined him with the flashlight. What he'd uncovered looked like a piece of weathered wood, but when I cleared away more dirt, I realized it was much larger. A wooden platform or floor, buried under decades of forest debris. As I swept away leaves and soil, more of the structure became visible. We weren't camped in a natural clearing. We were parked on top of a building. I spent the rest of the night excavating by flashlight, Copper helping enthusiastically, as if this was a game we'd played many times before. By dawn, I'd uncovered enough to understand the structure. A large wooden platform with posts driven deep into the ground, the remnants of walls along the edges, and in the center, a trapdoor secured with a rusted iron latch. The RV was parked directly over the trapdoor. I knew I shouldn't open it. Every horror movie I'd ever seen, every campfire story I'd ever heard, had taught me that opening mysterious trapdoors in the middle of haunted forests was a spectacularly bad idea. But the woman made of light had told me not to trust the map. And the map kept folding itself into different shapes, and we couldn't leave this place no matter how far we drove. Maybe the answers were below. The trapdoor opened with a shriek of rusty hinges. My flashlight beam penetrated about 10 feet down before being swallowed by absolute darkness. A ladder made of rough-hewn logs descended into the black. The air that rose from the opening smelled of earth and thyme and something else, something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. "Stay here, boy," I told Copper, but he was already starting down the ladder. The chamber beneath our campsite was larger than I'd expected, roughly the size of a small house. The walls were lined with carved wooden shelves, and on those shelves were hundreds of objects: folded papers, small bundles tied with bark, carved figurines, photographs, personal items of every description. It was a shrine, or maybe a trap. The photographs drew me first. Most were old, faded black and white images of people in outdated clothing. Families posed stiffly in front of cabins, loggers standing beside enormous fallen trees, children playing in forest clearings. But mixed among the old photos were newer ones, color prints, even some digital photos printed on computer paper. I recognized faces from the list I'd found at the cairn. Sarah Chen, a young woman with a bright smile standing beside a blue tent. Marcus Webb, middle-aged and bearded, holding up a large fish. The Anderson family, parents and 2 children, gathered around a campfire. And at the end of one shelf, in a frame made of twisted cedar bark, was a photo I'd never seen before. Myself and Copper, taken from a distance as we'd hiked up the creek on our second day. Someone had been watching us. Someone had been planning. "The lost ones," I whispered, remembering the note in the cairn bundle. Behind me, Copper whined softly. When I turned, I saw he was staring at the chamber's far wall, where something was carved directly into the living wood of an enormous tree root. It was a map. Not folded paper this time, but lines cut deep into the root's surface. The carved map showed the forest from above, with the clearing marked by a circle in the center. Radiating out from the circle were dozens of lines, paths or roads that led to other clearings, other circles. Some of the circles had symbols carved beside them: a tent, a cabin, an RV, a car. Others just had numbers, body counts. I followed one of the carved paths with my finger, tracing it to a circle marked with the symbol of a cabin and the number 7. Another path led to a circle marked with a car and the number 3. The circle representing our clearing had an RV symbol, and carved in fresh wood that showed pale against the aged root, the number 2. We were never going to leave this place. We were going to become part of the collection. Our photos added to the shrine, our names added to the lists left at cairns throughout the forest. Other travelers would find our belongings scattered along trails. Our personal effects would become mysterious offerings for future victims to discover. The woman, made of light, hadn't been trying to warn me about the map. She'd been warning me that I was already part of it. I heard footsteps above us. Slow, deliberate steps circling the RV. Copper pressed against my legs. No longer the excited explorer, but a frightened dog seeking comfort from his human. The flashlight beam wavered as my hands began to shake. The steps stopped directly above the trapdoor opening. Then, impossibly, someone began to climb down the ladder. It was Ranger Briggs, but not as I'd seen him at the station. His uniform was torn and stained, his face pale as bone. He moved with the jerky, unnatural gait of something that had forgotten how to be human. "Told you to stick to the established campgrounds," he said, and his voice was like wind through dry leaves. "Told you to trust me on this one." "You're dead," I whispered. "You've been dead for years." Dead. Alive. Same thing here. He stepped off the ladder and approached the shrine wall. "Been keeping watch over this place since 1987. My turn's almost up, though." Been waiting for someone to take over. He gestured to the carved map with one pale hand. See, the forest needs tenders. Needs someone to guide the lost ones to their proper places. Someone to fold the maps, leave the offerings, maintain the shrines. His eyes, when he turned them on me, were entirely black. Someone to make sure the patterns stay strong. I won't do it. Everyone says that at first. Briggs smiled, and I saw that his teeth had been carved into points. But you'll change your mind after a few months, after the hunger starts, after you begin to forget what it was like to be warm. Above us, I heard more footsteps. Lots of them. The other lost ones were gathering. The dog can go, Briggs said conversationally. Animals don't make good tenders. Too honest, too pure. We'll just make it quick for him. That's when I ran. I shoved past Briggs and scrambled up the ladder, Copper close behind me. The clearing above was full of figures, dozens of them, arranged in the spoke pattern I'd noticed in the shadows. Men, women, children, all wearing the pale, hungry expressions of the long dead. Some I recognized from the photographs below. Others were strangers, but all of them wore the same black eyes, the same pointed teeth. They moved toward us slowly, not bothering to hurry. Where could we go? The roads led nowhere. The forest went on forever. This clearing was the heart of something vast and patient, and we were already caught in its web. But I still had one option they hadn't considered. I ran to the RV and started the engine. The lost ones watched with mild curiosity as I put the vehicle in drive and floored the accelerator. Not toward any of the roads leading out, but directly toward the largest tree at the clearing's edge. A massive Douglas fir that had probably been growing here since before the first Europeans saw this coast. The RV hit the tree at 30 miles per hour. The impact threw me against the windshield and sent Copper tumbling across the cabin. The engine died with a grinding shriek of metal. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. But we weren't dead, and more importantly, we weren't trapped. The collision had torn a gap in the forest's wall, a passage between this clearing and whatever lay beyond. I could see light through the gap. Not the soft, organic light of the floating orbs, but harsh electric illumination. Streetlights. Civilization. Come on, boy. I grabbed Copper and our emergency pack and plunged through the gap. We emerged onto the shoulder of Highway 101, 20 yards from a rest stop with fluorescent lights and vending machines and the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. Other people. Real people with warm skin and normal eyes, families with children, truckers drinking coffee from styrofoam cups. I collapsed beside a picnic table and hugged Copper while he licked my face, both of us shaking with relief and exhaustion. A concerned trucker asked if we needed help, offered to call someone, wanted to know what had happened to us. I didn't know how to explain that we'd been trapped in a forest that existed between the normal world and someplace else, that we'd escaped from a collection of the dead who tended shrines to their own victims, that somewhere behind us, in a clearing that might not show up on any real map, an RV sat crumpled against a tree while hungry ghosts waited for the next travelers to find their folded paper invitations. Instead, I just said we'd had car trouble and needed a ride to the nearest town. It's been 3 months since Copper and I escaped from that place. We're living in Seattle now, in a small apartment with good locks and neighbors close by. I've thrown away every map I owned and navigate by phone GPS exclusively. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up to find pieces of paper folded into impossible shapes on my kitchen table. Bus schedules, grocery lists, magazine pages, anything paper will do. They fold themselves into patterns that hurt to look at, geometric designs that seem to pull at the edges of my vision. And when I unfold them, trying to return them to normal, I sometimes catch glimpses of that carved route map in the underground shrine. The circles are still there, the paths still radiating out into the endless forest. But now there's a new addition. A small mark beside our old clearing carved in fresh wood. A single word. Escaped. Below it, in the same fresh carving, is a question mark. I think they're still looking for us. I think the maps that fold themselves in my apartment are invitations, attempts to lure us back. Every folded paper is a reminder that we're marked now, part of their collection whether we're physically present or not. Copper seems to sense it too. He's been having nightmares, whimpering in his sleep and pawing at invisible things. Yesterday, I caught him digging at the hardwood floor of our apartment, the same eager digging motion he'd used to uncover the wooden platform beneath our campsite. I don't know what he's trying to find. I'm afraid to let him finish. The woman at the adoption center said she had the perfect dog for me. A golden retriever mix, friendly and well-trained, owner surrendered due to changed circumstances. She didn't mention that his previous owner had been Sarah Chen, the first name on that list in the Cairn bundle. I think some connections run deeper than we understand. I think Copper might be trying to dig his way back to the place where his first human became one of the lost ones. And late at night, when I hear him scratching at the floor and see papers folding themselves in the kitchen, I wonder if we ever really escaped at all. Maybe this apartment, this new life, this feeling of safety is just another clearing in an endless forest. Maybe the roads out of Seattle will start looping back on themselves soon. Maybe there is no escape from being lost. The map on my coffee table just folded itself into the shape of a hand, pointing toward the door. I think it's time to go. Story. Feeve. The pain was excruciating, but it was also liberating. The moment the blade pierced my flesh, the roots holding me to the ground withered and released. The numbness in my legs disappeared, replaced by sharp, very human agony. I could move again. The creature wearing Sarah's face recoiled as if I'd stabbed it instead of myself. "What have you done?" it shrieked, its voice now completely inhuman. "You were so close to peace." I pulled the knife from my leg and stumbled backward, blood soaking through my jeans. The amphitheater of trees began to shake and blur, as if the entire scene was losing focus. The seated figures flickered like bad television reception, and Marcus on his throne let out a roar of frustration that shook the earth. "You can't escape," he bellowed, his fluid form expanding and contracting with rage. "This is where all roads lead. This is where everyone ends up." But the forest was already changing around me, the supernatural architecture collapsing back into ordinary trees and underbrush. The creatures were fading, becoming translucent, though their voices still echoed through the woods. "We'll be waiting," the Sarah thing called as it dissolved into mist. "Every time you close your eyes, every time you doubt yourself, we'll be there. You can't run forward forever, William. Everyone walks backward eventually." I limped through the disintegrating nightmare, following what I hoped was the direction we'd originally come from. My leg throbbed with each step, but the pain kept me grounded, kept me human. I pressed forward through the forest as it gradually returned to normal. Trees growing right side up, the silence broken by natural sounds of insects and small animals moving through the underbrush. After what felt like hours, I saw lights ahead. Real lights. The yellow glow of street lamps and the white shine of headlights on asphalt. I crashed through a final line of trees and found myself standing beside Highway 61, the main road that ran along Minnesota's North Shore. A semi-truck was approaching from the south, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. I stumbled into the road, waving my arms frantically. The truck's air brakes hissed as it came to a stop, and the driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s, leaned out of his cab window. "Jesus, buddy, what happened to you?" he asked, taking in my torn clothes and bloody leg. "You look like you've been through hell." "My girlfriend," I gasped. "We were camping at Cascade River State Park. There was an accident. She's still out there." The trucker grabbed his radio and called for emergency services while I collapsed against his truck, exhaustion finally overtaking me. Within minutes, the highway was filled with flashing lights. Police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, even a helicopter that circled overhead with a searchlight. I told them about the camping trip, about how Sarah and Marcus had gotten lost in the woods, about the strange things I'd seen. I left out the supernatural elements, focusing on the basics. 3 people camping, 2 missing, 1 injured. The officers seemed skeptical of some details, but they organized a massive search operation anyway. They found our RV exactly where we'd left it, surrounded by the abandoned camp chairs and cold fire pit. Marcus was inside, unconscious but alive, suffering from what the paramedics described as severe alcohol poisoning. There was no sign of Sarah. For 3 days, search teams combed the forest around Cascade River State Park. They brought in tracking dogs, thermal imaging equipment, even volunteers from neighboring counties. They found no trace of her. No footprints, no torn clothing, nothing to indicate she'd ever been there at all. On the 4th day, the search was officially called off. The police theorized that Sarah had fallen into the Cascade River and been swept downstream toward Lake Superior. They promised to keep the case open, to continue investigating, but I could see in their eyes that they'd already written her off as dead. Marcus recovered from his alcohol poisoning but claimed to remember nothing after dinner on our first night. He seemed genuinely confused by my account of events, insisting that he'd simply drunk too much and passed out in the RV. The doctors said memory loss was common with severe intoxication, and the police accepted his story. I was treated for my leg wound, a deep laceration that required 23 stitches, and underwent a psychological evaluation. The therapist diagnosed me with acute stress reaction and prescribed medication for anxiety and sleep disorders. Everyone was very understanding, very supportive. They all agreed that losing someone you love in such circumstances could cause hallucinations, false memories, a complete break from reality. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what had taken Sarah. 2 months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a Polaroid showing the inside of the funhouse mirror maze. In the reflection of one of the mirrors, barely visible but unmistakably real, was Sarah. She was walking backward down a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity, her eyes black as coal, her mouth curved in that predatory smile. On the back of the photograph, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a single sentence. "She's waiting for you to join her." I burned the photograph immediately, but I can't burn the memory of it. Just like I can't burn the memory of that night in the forest, or the knowledge that somewhere, in whatever backward dimension those creatures inhabit, Sarah is still walking in reverse, moving further and further away from everything she used to be. I've tried to move on. I found a new job, started seeing a therapist regularly, even began dating again, but every night when I close my eyes, I hear that voice calling my name from deep in the forest. Every time I look in a mirror, I half expect to see her reflection staring back at me from the other side of the glass. The doctors say the hallucinations will fade with time and medication. My friends and family believe I'm healing, that I'm learning to accept Sarah's death and move forward with my life. But they don't understand. I'm not moving forward at all, because every step I take, every day that passes, every moment I spend trying to build a new life, I can feel it pulling at me. That same supernatural peace Marcus had described, that promise of an end to pain and regret and the crushing weight of forward momentum. Sometimes I catch myself walking differently, my heel touching the ground just a fraction of a second before my toe. Sometimes I find myself staring at clocks running backward, or birds flying in reverse formation, or my own reflection moving independently in shop windows. The boundary between the normal world and that other place is thinner than people realize, and I can feel myself slipping through it bit by bit. Last week, I drove back to Cascade River State Park. I told myself it was for closure, a way to finally put the experience behind me. But really, I think I was hoping to find that trail again, that path that leads backward into forever. The park looked completely normal. Families camping, hikers on the trails, the Cascade River tumbling down its rocky falls toward Lake Superior. I walked every trail, visited every campsite, searched for any sign of the backward world I'd stumbled into. But there was nothing unusual, nothing supernatural. Just a beautiful state park in Minnesota's North Shore. As I was leaving, I stopped at the ranger station to ask about that night. The ranger on duty was young, probably new to the job, but he listened politely as I described what had happened. "Oh," he said when I finished, "you must be talking about the October incident. Yeah, we get reports like that every few years, usually around this time when the seasons change. People see strange things in the woods, hear voices, get turned around on trails they've hiked a dozen times before." "Every few years?" I asked. He nodded. "My supervisor says it's been happening since the park opened. maybe even before that. The Ojibwe have stories about this area, about spirits that walk the wrong way through time. Most people just get spooked and leave, but occasionally someone goes missing. He paused, looking uncomfortable. Like your girlfriend. I'm sorry about that. How many? I asked. How many people have gone missing? I don't have exact numbers, he admitted, but the supervisor showed me the files once. Goes back decades, maybe longer. I left the park with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of relief. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Other people had experienced what I'd experienced, had seen what I'd seen. Some of them had even made it back to tell the story. But that relief was short-lived, because it also meant that the backward world was real. Sarah really was trapped there, walking in reverse through an endless maze of mirrors and inverted trees. And sooner or later, it would come for me too. I can feel it happening already. Yesterday, I caught myself writing my name backward on a work document. This morning, I noticed that my coffee cup was emptying instead of filling as I poured cream into it. Tonight, as I write this account, I keep having to stop and reread sentences because the words seem to be arranging themselves in reverse order. The pull is getting stronger. The promise of peace, of an end to struggle and disappointment, becomes more tempting with each passing day. My life has improved since that night. The debt is manageable. I found steady work. The therapist says I'm making excellent progress, but none of it feels real. It's all just forward momentum, leading inevitably toward more failure, more loss, more pain. Sometimes I think about that kitchen knife, about the way the pain had cut through the supernatural influence and reminded me of what I was fighting for. But Sarah isn't waiting for me to save her anymore. She's waiting for me to join her, to walk backward with her into whatever exists beyond the mirrors. The doctors say I'm healing, but I know better. I'm not moving forward at all. Every day, every hour, every minute, I'm walking backward toward that forest, toward that clearing where all the lost people wait with their hungry smiles and their black, empty eyes. I've stopped taking the medication. I've stopped seeing the therapist. I've started packing my belongings, though I'm not sure why. Maybe because I won't be needing them much longer. Tonight, I can hear Sarah calling my name from the bathroom mirror. Tomorrow, I think I'll answer. Because Marcus was right. Everyone walks backward eventually. And maybe that's not such a terrible thing. Maybe the peace they promised is worth the price of everything human, everything real, everything that moves forward through time toward uncertainty and pain. I can see the highway from my apartment window stretching north toward Minnesota's North Shore, toward Cascade River State Park, toward the trail that leads backward into forever. I think I'll go for a drive. After all, Sarah is waiting. Story 6. I'm Ava, 34. The fire at Dolly Sod's Wilderness, West Virginia hissed like it was speaking a word. That should have been my first warning, but I was too busy trying to forget why I'd driven my RV 8 hours from Richmond to this godforsaken plateau in the first place. The flames kept making that sound, a wet, urgent whisper that raised the hair on my arms, but I told myself it was just the moisture in the wood. Green wood hisses. Everyone knows that. I'd parked my 26-foot Winnebago at the edge of the camping area, backing it against a stand of red spruce that looked black in the dying light. The other campsites were empty, which suited me fine. I'd come here to be alone, to think through what Marcus had told me before I walked out of our apartment for the last time. The things he'd said about my sister Jenny, about what really happened to her 5 years ago in these same mountains. The lies I'd been telling myself ever since. The fire pit was already there when I arrived. A circle of blackened stones with ash in the center that looked too fresh for an abandoned campsite. I should have questioned that, but the sun was setting fast, and I needed light. I gathered kindling from the forest floor, dry branches and strips of birch bark that should have caught easily. Instead, they smoldered and spat, producing that unnatural hiss every time the flames touched them. By full dark, I had a reluctant fire going and a can of chili warming on my camp stove. The silence up here was absolute in a way that city silence never is. No traffic, no neighbors, No hum of electricity, just the wind moving through the spruce and that constant whispering from the fire. I ate straight from the can, watching the flames dance and listening to them form almost words in a language I didn't recognize. When I was 14 and Jenny was 12, we'd gone camping with our parents not far from here. Jenny had been fascinated by the local legends. Stories about the Dolly Sod's bog being cursed, about hikers who went missing and were found days later with no memory of where they'd been. She'd pestered every park ranger and local we met, collecting stories like other kids collected stamps. The Monongahela forest was old, they told her, older than the mountains themselves. Some places, they said, were better left undisturbed. I hadn't thought about those stories in years until Marcus brought up Jenny's death, until he told me what the police report really said, the parts our parents had kept from me. Jenny hadn't died in a simple hiking accident like they'd claimed. She'd been found at the bottom of a cliff, yes, but not where she was supposed to be, not anywhere near the marked trails. She'd somehow made it 15 miles deeper into the wilderness than her planned route, and when they found her, she wasn't alone. The fire hissed louder, and this time I definitely heard words. Not English, but something that made my teeth ache. I added another log, hoping to drown out the sound, but it only got stronger. The flames showed faces screaming silently, mouth after mouth opening in the orange glow, all of them familiar somehow. All of them looking at me with Jenny's eyes. I stood up so fast my camp chair tipped over. The coffee cup I'd been holding shattered against the rocks, sending steaming liquid across my boots. For a moment, the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the wind in the trees. Then the fire settled back to normal crackling, and I told myself I'd been imagining things. Stress, grief, too much time alone with my thoughts. But as I bent to pick up the chair, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water. There, burned into the metal mesh of the seat, was a perfect handprint. Small and delicate, with slender fingers that I recognized. Jenny's hand. I'd helped her make handprint art projects when we were kids, pressing her palm into paint and then onto paper. I knew every line and crease of that hand, and it was seared into my chair as if someone had pressed it there while the metal was molten. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the fire pit. The flames leaped higher, showing me more faces in the blaze, dozens of them now, all screaming soundlessly, all wearing Jenny's face. But their eyes were wrong, too wide and too dark, filled with something that wasn't quite human. Jenny, I whispered and immediately felt foolish. My sister was dead, had been dead for 5 years. This was just stress and exhaustion playing tricks on me. The same way I'd thought I heard her voice in the apartment sometimes. The way I'd catch glimpses of her reflection in store windows. The fire responded by showing me exactly what I didn't want to see. In the shifting flames, clear as a movie screen, I saw Jenny falling. Not slipping, not losing her footing, but being pulled backward off that cliff by something with too many fingers. Something that wore the face of our father but moved wrong. Joints bending in directions that should have been impossible. I ran for the RV, fumbling with the door handle with numb fingers, the safety of the aluminum shell, the electric lights, the familiar smell of the vanilla air freshener I'd hung from the rearview mirror. But when I flicked the switch, nothing happened. I tried again, panic making me clumsy. The lights were dead, and when I turned the key in the ignition, I got nothing but silence. Behind me, the fire had grown. I could see its glow through the RV's windows, brighter now than any campfire should be. And in that glow, shapes were moving. Tall figures that swayed like trees in a windstorm, but trees don't have arms that reach and beckon. Trees don't have faces that shift and change with every flicker of flame. I locked the door and pulled the curtains shut, but the light came through anyway, painting everything inside the RV in shades of orange and red. The flames showed faces screaming silently even on the fabric of my curtains, on the surface of the small refrigerator, in the mirror above the tiny sink. Jenny's face, over and over, mouth open in eternal agony. That's when I heard the knocking. Soft at first, just a gentle tapping on the side of the RV, then louder, more insistent, a rhythmic pattern that I recognized from childhood. The secret knock Jenny and I had used for our blanket fort. for passing messages after bedtime, for letting each other know we were scared and needed comfort. Knock, 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 knock. Ava? The voice was Jenny's, exactly as I remembered it from when she was 12. High and sweet, with the slight lisp she'd had before getting her braces fixed. Ava, I'm cold. Let me in. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound came through anyway. Not just through my ears, but through my bones, vibrating in my skull like a tuning fork. I've been waiting for you, the voice continued. And now it was closer, right outside the door. I've been waiting 5 years for you to come back. You said you'd always take care of me. You promised. I had promised. The night before Jenny left for that hiking trip, we'd gotten into a fight about something stupid. I couldn't even remember what. She'd gone to bed crying, and I'd been too proud to apologize. The last thing I said to her was that she was a baby, that she needed to grow up and stop expecting me to fix everything for her. I'm sorry, I whispered now, and the knocking stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Jenny's voice again, but different, older, colder. Sorry doesn't help me, Ava. Sorry doesn't change what happened. Sorry doesn't bring me back from where they took me. Who took you? Jenny, who? Open the door, and I'll show you. I almost did it. God help me, I almost turned that handle because it was Jenny's voice and I'd spent 5 years wishing I could see her again, could tell her I was sorry, could take back everything that had gone wrong between us. But something made me look through the small window beside the door first. The thing standing outside wasn't Jenny. It had her face, her long brown hair, even the constellation of freckles across her nose that she'd always hated. But it was wrong in ways that made my brain refuse to process what I was seeing. Too tall, for one thing, at least 7 feet with arms that hung down past its knees. Its fingers were too long, too thin, ending in what looked like twigs or roots. And its eyes were holes, not empty sockets, but actual holes that went all the way through its head. I could see the fire burning behind it, the flames visible through the spaces where eyes should have been. Open the door, Ava. The voice was still Jenny's, but the mouth wasn't moving right. The words were coming from somewhere else, maybe from inside my own head. I have so much to show you, so many friends to introduce you to. They've been waiting to meet you. I backed away from the window, but I could still see it standing there, patient as a statue, waiting. Other shapes moved behind it, more tall figures with faces I almost recognized. Our mother, but stretched and distorted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. Our father, but with bark for skin and branches growing from his skull. Friends from school, neighbors from our childhood street. All of them wrong in subtle ways that made my stomach clench with nausea. The knocking started again, but now it was coming from all around the RV. They were surrounding me. These things that wore familiar faces over bodies that weren't quite human. The sound was deafening, a percussion symphony of fists and palms and root-like fingers drumming against aluminum and fiberglass. I crawled into the back of the RV, into the tiny bedroom, and pulled the covers over my head like I was 5 years old again. But the knocking followed me, and now there were voices too, dozens of them, all people I'd known and lost, all begging me to come outside and join them. Ava, please. That was my grandmother, dead for 10 years but sounding exactly like she had when she was alive. I'm so lonely here. Come play with me like you used to. Sweetheart, don't leave us out here in the cold. My grandfather, who'd taught me to fish and died of lung cancer when I was 16. Ava, I forgive you. Jenny again, her voice the worst of all because it was the most real, the most loving. I know you didn't mean what you said. I know you loved me. Come outside and I'll prove I forgive you. But underneath all their voices, I could hear something else. A sound like wind through dry leaves, like branches scraping against windows, like roots pushing up through soil. It was the sound of the forest itself, and it was hungry. I don't know how long I lay there, listening to the dead beg me to join them. Hours, maybe. The sounds ebbed and flowed like a tide, sometimes so loud I thought my eardrums would burst, sometimes fading to a whisper that was almost worse because it made me strain to hear what they were saying. At some point, exhaustion overtook terror, and I fell asleep clutching a kitchen knife I'd found in one of the drawers. I woke to silence and sunlight streaming through the RV's windows. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare brought on by stress and too much coffee. Then I saw the handprints. They covered every window, every surface of the RV's exterior that I could see from inside. Hundreds of them, all different sizes, all pressed into the metal and glass like they'd been molten when the hands touched them. Some were small, child-sized, others were enormous, with fingers as long as my forearm. A few weren't quite human at all. Too many joints or claws instead of fingernails, or what looked like bark patterns in the palm lines. The fire had burned down to ash and blackened stones, but the smell lingered. Not wood smoke, but something organic and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. When I looked out the window toward where the tall figures had been standing, I saw depressions in the earth. Footprints, but not from human feet. These were longer, narrower, with what looked like root systems spreading out from each step. My hands shook as I tried the ignition again. This time, miracle of miracles, the engine turned over. I didn't waste time packing or securing anything. I threw the RV into drive and got the hell out of there, tires spitting gravel and dust as I fled down the narrow forest road. But I made the mistake of looking in the rearview mirror. They were following me. Not running, just walking with that swaying, tree-like gait, but somehow keeping pace with the RV even as I pushed it to 40, 50, 60 miles per hour on the winding mountain road. There were dozens of them now, a procession of wrong-faced figures stretching back into the forest as far as I could see. All of them wearing the faces of people I'd loved and lost. All of them reaching toward my retreating vehicle with those impossible fingers. And at the front of the group, keeping perfect pace with my RV despite the fact that she was walking and I was driving, was Jenny. Still 12 years old, still wearing the clothes she'd died in. Hiking boots, khaki shorts, a green t-shirt with our high school logo. But her face was changing as I watched, shifting between the sister I remembered and something else. Something with too many teeth and holes where eyes should be. She was mouthing words, and even though I couldn't hear her over the engine noise, I could read her lips. "You can't leave me again, Ava. You promised you'd always take care of me. You promised." I pressed harder on the gas pedal, taking the mountain curves faster than was safe, but they kept pace. They followed me all the way to the main highway, all the way to the edge of the Monongahela forest boundary. Only when I crossed that invisible line did they stop, standing in a row across the road like a living barrier, watching me flee. I drove straight through to Richmond without stopping, not even for gas. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, my hands were still shaking. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, checking every mirror, every window, making sure nothing had followed me home. That was 3 weeks ago. I've tried to go back to normal, tried to pretend it was all stress-induced hallucination brought on by Marcus's revelations about Jenny's death. I've thrown myself into work, into therapy, into anything that might erase the memory of those faces in the fire, those voices in the dark. But normal is impossible when you know what's waiting for you, because they didn't stay in the forest. Every night, just after sunset, I hear the knocking. Soft at first, then insistent. The secret knock Jenny and I used as children. The rhythm that means, "I'm scared and I need you." It comes from the walls, from the windows, from the spaces between spaces where things that aren't quite human wait with infinite patience. And every night the voices get closer. Not just Jenny now, but all of them. Every person I've ever loved and lost. All begging me to come outside, to join them. To keep my promise to always take care of my little sister. The worst part is that I want to. God help me, I want to open that door and let them in, because the guilt of losing Jenny is worse than whatever those things might do to me. At least then I'd be with her again, even if it's not really her anymore. I've started sleeping with all the lights on, but the flames show faces screaming silently even in the glow of LED bulbs. I've tried leaving the city, but they follow me everywhere now. They're not bound to the forest anymore. They're bound to me, to my guilt, to the promise I made and broke and can never fulfill because the sister they wear like a mask is gone and has been gone for 5 years. Tonight, the knocking is louder than it's ever been. They're not just at the door anymore. They're in the walls, in the floor, in the spaces between my thoughts. The sound is so rhythmic, so hypnotic, that I find myself walking toward the front door without meaning to. My hand is on the deadbolt now, and Jenny's voice is so clear, so real, so achingly familiar. "Ava, please, I'm so cold out here. I've been waiting for you for so long. Don't leave me alone again. You promised you'd always take care of me." The lock turns easily under my fingers. Too easily, like it wants to be opened. I can see her now through the peephole, standing in the hallway of my apartment building. She looks exactly like she did when she was 12, but her shadow is wrong. Too tall, too twisted, reaching across the floor like grasping fingers. Behind her, in the stairwell, other shadows move. All the people I've loved and lost, all wearing faces that are almost right, but not quite. I kept my promise. I whispered to the door, to Jenny, to the things that wear the faces of the dead. I came back for you. I tried to find you. "I know," she says, and now her voice is coming from inside my apartment, from right behind me. "But I found you first." I turn around and there she is. Not outside anymore, but here with me in my living room, still wearing those hiking clothes, still 12 years old, still my little sister. But when she smiles, I see too many teeth, and her eyes are holes that show me the fire still burning in some distant forest. Flames that show faces screaming silently for all eternity. "Come on, Ava," she says, reaching out with fingers that are too long, too thin, ending in points like thorns. "Let's go home. Let's go back to the fire. There are so many people who want to meet you there." The flames show faces screaming silently, and now I understand that they're not screaming in pain. They're screaming warnings. But it's too late. Jenny's hand is cold as winter earth when she takes mine. And as we walk together toward the door, toward the stairwell full of impossible shadows, I realize that some promises are too powerful to break. Some love too strong to die. And some places, like the fire at Dolly Sod's Wilderness, are hungry enough to follow you home and patient enough to wait until you're ready to keep your word. The knocking has stopped now. There's no need for it anymore. I'm finally going to take care of my little sister, just like I promised I would. Forever.